Question about structured approach to programming. So this might be something that that you haven't really done a great deal of thinking about, but it's something you've almost certainly done with your programming code. So it's explaining how this developer who wrote these routines, or at least this is a design for the routines, has used a structured approach to programming. Well, the main idea is decomposition, I suppose. So decomposing a problem, splitting it down into smaller uh, parts so that they're more easily understood. In this case, is used functions and procedures. So it's a function get suit returns a string saying hearts or diamonds, etc. The function get rank, the number value of the card, so 1 if it's an ace, 2 if it's a 2, etc., but then tens and jacks, etc. And convert cards, so convert takes the cards, returns the complete string representation of the array that's in cards. So if cards is 3-1, the string returned is 3 of diamonds. So it's using these other subroutines to convert the cards. So splitting down into functions, for one thing, it's preferable to do that because each function can do just one thing. So that's called the principle of minimality. So a function should just do one thing. So in this case, get suit just gets the suit, get rank just gets the rank, and convert cards uses both of them to return the card. So it's function that's doing one thing. They're easier to test. So testing, if you've got functions and procedures, they're easier to test in isolation. So you can test the one piece of code, and if you know that works, then if there's a logic error somewhere else, then that must be somewhere else. There are other things that are structured programming that's not shown here as well. But if you said it's decomposed into functions, each function just doing one job, and returning values from the function. So we're passing in parameters. So n is a parameter and cards is a parameter. So parameters. So we're passing in parameters and we're returning values. So they are all structured approaches to programming that would get you marks on this particular question. However, there are some other things that we could say are structured approach to programming. So minimize global variable use. And in this case, we've passed parameters rather than used globals, which is good. So global variables should be avoided where possible. They are easy sometimes to change without noticing or without keeping up with the actual value of the variable. They sort of take more RAM, I suppose, although we do have plenty of RAM these days, but they do take a bit more RAM because they exist throughout while the program's running. And if you use local variables instead, they are destroyed when the definition that they're running in is complete. So destroyed after the definition is complete. Obviously, we can pass those values around, but the variable only exists if it's local inside the definition it's created in. So using standard programming constructs and practices, so appropriate use of iteration. So what I mean by that is if you use a for loop in the right place, so when you know how many times to loop, and a while loop correctly, so when it's conditional. So those things are also structured programming. Using the correct if and elif statements instead of just lots of if statements. So using a statement that's linked together, that's another way of using structured programming. And finally, I guess consistency. So if you're naming variables, you might use camel case like this, where you have lowercase and then an uppercase where there's another word starts. If you're consistent with that all the time, then that's another structured programming technique. So there are lots of those structured programming techniques. Not all of those were obviously needed to answer this question. Really, it's just looking for decomposition, the fact it's split into functions, the fact that it's passing parameters and returning values. So the interface of a function is the name, the parameter it's passing, and the return value. So that's called the functions interface, which also might be useful to know.